Sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I have, and I apologize, my throat is a little sore today, so I might be creaking a bit. But if you don't mind, I'd like to jump right in with some questions based on kind of what I've seen so far. Let me pull up a note stock real quick. So you contacted me over Facebook. And so I guess where I'd like, or where I tend to start with kind of projects like this and ideas, this is to ask some kind of standard questions. So do you have a concept of who your primary audience is for the outreach that you did to me?
Yeah, there's two demographics, and the more likely one, as rare as both of them are, the more likely one would probably be the Ivy Leagues. So the sort of high IQ, well-educated, the sort of privileged class, you could say, would probably understand the content a little bit quicker, particularly philosophers well-versed in German idealism, German philosophy of the 1800s, or Kantian philosophers. But usually philosophers in general at that level. And then the other demographic are the naturally gifted but not privileged individuals who might be more blue collar, working class, union organizers, grassroots organizers that really are striving for justice. And so to find justice, they go through the path of truth seeking. And through that truth seeking and justice, they arrive at philosophy anyway, from the more practical aspect. So between theory and practice, I'm hoping to get at least those two started. And then from there, get the education moving inwards to those who are wrapped up in the current distractions of the kind of culture that we're in, that I think is leading us on a very dangerous path. So those are the two that I think, without any more investment, could watch that presentation and probably pick something valuable out for themselves to start asking questions.
And so that's good. It's good that you have a
Thank you.
fairly narrow audience. Now, those two audiences come from two very different places. It sounds like you were hoping to make a presentation that would speak to both of those audiences. That's very difficult to do. For the purpose of this, I mean, so for me, I'm not Ivy League at all, and I've bumped into philosophy. So when you say Kant, or you say, Daguerre, any of the philosophers' names, I will have heard them. But if they're not Stoics, I don't know what their philosophy boundaries and overlaps and Venn diagram their philosophies over anything else. So it might be good for us to pursue this, assuming that the audience is more blue collar.
Okay, excellent. So you're probably more the just naturally talented, came across truth. Stoicism is sort of the moment that comes after slavery, according to Hegel. So it forces you inwards into the realm of thought, because the outer world is so painful that it makes you become philosophical, because you have to find meaning in something other than material possessions. So I don't know if you've had the same experiences as I had growing up, but I was born sort of blue collar, working family, but very honest people. And so through that experience of marginalization, I had that sort of going inward moment. And so if you think that Stoicism is the best way forward, yes, that is one of the moments in this.
It's just the one I'm most familiar with, as far as prior knowledge. And I've found value in it. Yeah, so my expansion out of looking outwards just came about from, I made a success of myself. I did come from, both my parents had college degrees, but actually me and one other brother never went to college, and my oldest brother went to college and he did computer engineering. which actually ends up being more blue collar than people say. Because you know.
Well, welcome to the future.
Right. My interest in projects that kind of improve the world and seeing the state of the world actually wasn't born from pain so much, but I did 20 years in corporate America, and I realized that I was automation and computers, and I automated 10 jobs out. No one got fired because there was too much work to do. And I realized I didn't get even a fraction of the amount of money that I saved the company. And back then I was still very physical, you know. I probably had a comfortable living, but there was a lot of risk. Like, was I going to be able to retire and stuff like that? So I was still very materialistic. And then I decided, well, I need to kind of improve the world. And, you know, the jump into that is doing kind of startups and the VC world. So I did a startup, actually like 3, one of them hit. And now I have a fairly good runway as long as I keep contract work. So I realized now where the state I'm in right now is, it's like, well, I want to spend 50% of my time making the world a better place. And if I can make a living off of that, then it would be 100%. But until then, until I can figure out how to fund my kind of my beneficial and providing value for the world, I'll just work a contract 50% of my time. And my spouse graciously allowed me to cut my the amount of income I have to make in half. And being a software engineer, make pretty good money anyways. So yeah, so that's where I am. So just for the framing. So, and you know, that's a pretty narrow focus. You certainly don't want to create a presentation at that narrow, but just give you an idea of where I'm coming from. And you said you were open to kind of like feedback on the presentation, right?
Yeah. How it was interpreted by you. It's kind of like, it's out there, right? So in terms of the Overton window, we already know the reaction we're going to get, which is that consciousness can't absorb concepts it doesn't understand at first. So there's going to be negation right away. But because, you know, as a sort of general presentation that's supposed to be a catch-all, it's begun in such a way that we're preempting the triggers. So in the beginning, that's why we focus on, hey, here's these 27 oppositions that people will usually get triggered by and not make it through the presentation. But if we made this presentation, or if I made this presentation just for Stoics, right, or blue collar Stoics or engineering Stoics, then for your demographic, maybe it would have a much higher resonancy rate, right? So in terms of specific niches, that kind of feedback, we already sort of, I guess, would know how it would resonate with people. But in terms of, if this got out there with a couple of people teaching it, that had the philosophical resolve to stick with their opposites during the presentation to get to the sublation, what is the term for it, then eventually the team is building without having to change the content. So I really loved if you're going to give some feedback, I really love this kind, if you don't mind, is on your website. I saw your Myers-Briggs, I saw your Strength Finder. You had all the most amazing measurement tests. I thought that's amazing. How do we know who we are? Like, know thyself. I think that because all the content is in the video, maybe instead of changing the video, there could be personality profiles of who watches it, and then we create timestamps to say, because you're this kind of personality with these kind of strengths and, you know, biases, you're going to want to start not at the beginning because you get triggered. You want to start at 3 hours and 52 minutes, and then you're going to want to watch that for 5 minutes, and you're going to jump over to 9 hours, and then you create these streams of watching that follows that person's own proclivities. And then as they start to sublate and they learn this new kind of logic, which I think anyway is Nobel Prize worthy, or 6 Nobel Prizes worth. I think then people can have the emotional resolve to break out of this kind of abstract thinking that's ripping our world apart, literally ripping our species apart, and also through war, and then also we're destroying the planet. And then there's AI making us obsolete on top of it all. Like you were saying, automation is going to basically make programmers potentially obsolete starting in 5 years. So like this is exponential stuff, and we need to get people starting to think in this living, more human kind of way. And the only person I've ever seen do that is Hegel. So in this presentation, it is a catch-all, but if you had to give the feedback in terms of, oh, maybe this would work, designing these sort of learning paths through the content, then it would save a lot of time from having to make basically an infinite amount of these videos for every single demographic. But once we get a couple of people learning the video enough, they might be inspired to say, wow, this actually is 6 Nobel Prizes worthy, and they will start making custom content for their demographic, because they know the demographic symbology, linguistics, whatever, and they can make really good content once they get inspired. So I guess, do you think there's any chance that somebody could get inspired to ask these questions and then want to go on that journey? Kind of like you're sort of doing now, you're asking all the right questions.
You mean through the presentation? Well, honestly, I didn't get far enough into the presentation to know if the content is there. I just know that currently your onboarding is not what I would think would be effective. Definitely not for the blue collar. I don't think it'd be very effective for the Ivy Leagues. And I guess when I say effective, it's like there's a range of effectiveness. Everything's kind of on a range. And like when I was doing startups, or I'm doing, when I'm doing explainer pages for my own kind of nonprofit, not-for-profit kind of ways to benefit the world and community things. That kind of like onboarding's probably a wrong phrase for it, but that introduction phase of it, which, later on, if we talk about, well, is it better to take this this video and send people to a certain point, or and have flows around, or break it up in separate videos and have flow. I mean, the technical aspects of how the flow is handled is there's lots of options. Probably the more important thing is to recognize that I believe the current introduction and flow is not optimal. Optimal, the wrong word. I think it could be improved. I don't see, like, the way that you approach me, I don't see that you would have a very high rate of people understanding. I guess is what I'm saying. And so what I can do is just kind of walk through how the introduction hit me, and where I saw things that were like warning flags saying that I don't want to engage any further, and things that I saw that intrigued me to engage. And then, you can make the decision, or I then would have some suggestions on how to sidestep, because some triggers, they're going to be there no matter what, but some triggers you can avoid. So if you think that would be helpful.
Yeah, hit me.
So, excuse me, there's the coughing, and I have mowers outside. I don't know if that's good. So I have to edit this. So your initial message to me over Facebook Messenger, I just thought I'd put up. Hey, Bentley, I see we know some of the same great people who are concerned about the direction of the world. With the presentation below, expand your philosophical work with Reasonpedia. So, of course, there's a lot of good things in there. You're narrowing it down to people that concerned about the direction of the world, right? So that's great. Use my name. The things that let me see, and that we know some people. So this is still, even though we have people and combined, it's still, I consider it a cold outreach. And I'm very triggered by cold outreaches. So like I have a boycott list of companies that do cold outreach. Now you're not a for-profit.
No.
And even for-profit, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'll need some funding at some point, but you're not profit motivated, right? So I discounted that. I mean, there's also the possibility of doing warm leads, like if you actually, if we actually both knew another person or something. That's not a big deal. You probably can't do that long term. But I just want to mention that that's something I'm even more triggery about than most people. But in this case, of course, I recognize that you didn't look like someone who's profit motivated and all that stuff. It did, yeah. It did trigger me when you say philosophical work, which that may be understood by looking at the reason. You know, if you go to reasonpedia.com, you probably, I could see why you would think that I fell more into the philosophical side. Although it's kind of a very practical thing, is kind of what I'm going for. So anyways, that was just kind of like but that's probably such a small nit. It's not worth pursuing. Okay. But I just thought I'd mention it in case you receive similar feedback. And then when I pull up the presentation, YouTube video, which is good. But so a trigger on that was a 10-hour YouTube video. And I can see why you do that. And like you mentioned, there's a certain trade-off on the level of effort that you'll put into the presentation and the number of people that you'll convert. And so it's not like I can say that definitely that's the wrong decision, but if you do have the time and resources, having a smaller targeted introduction, I think would be very important. Any questions so far? And then I can dive into the presentation itself.
No, so far it's pretty kosher. Yeah, that's the sort of typical reaction. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess up until this point, I don't have any huge changes. When I first came on, I thought I might, or when I first thought about contacting, I thought I might bit more about the philosophical thing. But since one of your target audiences is philosophical, and Reasonpedia could be seen as a philosophical endeavor, it's a reasonable assumption. And the contact was good. So up until here, those are some thoughts, but I don't suggest any huge changes. And of course, and like you mentioned, the intro, your goal with the very first, so when I open up the presentation, your goal is to inoculate against, I mean, that's too strong a word, but you know what I mean. You're tackling the triggers up front. Yeah. Which I think is a valid concern, and something to keep in mind to have part of the intro be. I would say that before that, it's important to let me as a person being introduced to the idea, letting me self-select whether I think the idea is valuable, and also let me know what I'm going to get out of this. Because if I hit this first screen, at this point, the only incentive I have to go further is that I know that you're someone that's trying to improve the world. So if I agree with that, then I might want to go further. But honestly, and this may be just me, so maybe this isn't as big, but I talk to someone who has an idea that'll improve the world, maybe once a month. So, that's been for like the last 5 years. So, I've seen 20 of these projects come and go. Mm-hmm. And most of them are not something that I find more optimized than what, a better use of my time than what I'm already working on. Some of them, it's like we're on different paths and we're going to combine at some point where they will be able to use my tool in their system. So if I was just a seeker that didn't already have a path forward to saving the world, then this might work. But if it's someone who already kind of has a path, and definitely someone who's ever like been seen a presentation. I mean, of course, not like yours because they're each unique and different. But if you're introducing someone to the concept of, hey, this is a project or a philosophy to improve the world. There's not a point at this point to go past the screen because 9 out of 10 of these are going to be not something I want to participate with, even though I'm glad that they exist. So at this point, I had no reason further, but I thought, well, if I can get some feedback, then I might go further. So I looked through it.
Yeah.
What's the value? I mean, other than the value of maybe being able to find an outlet for my desire to help the world, like there's lots of ways to do that. Can you narrow down what, either in what way am I helping the world through this, or how does this differ from the other options I already have? You know what I'm saying? What's the actual incentive for watching the rest of this presentation?
I would say you get the ultimate good and service, ultimate point of value. That is the point and purpose of life itself, which is flow states. And everything else is just instrumental to this intrinsic desire for a timeless, kind of completely immersive, intrinsically enjoyable experience of being a human being on this planet through something called flow states based upon universal logic. So Reasonpedia is, of course, based on logic to some degree, or else it wouldn't be reason. But the question is, well, what is logic? That question philosophically has never really been fully answered, even in distinction from reason itself. And so the thing that can be offered for you, if you are a little bit more philosophically inclined, even as a Stoic, is what are the clear definitions on these words so we can apply them wisely to create the kind of lives we want where flow state becomes more abundant? And the structured thinking that leads us there, I think, was only really provided by a philosopher named Hegel, at least to its first.
So let me break in. Apologies. But so the main thing I want to get before we get into the how and everything is the why for the viewer, right? And so if they're I'm putting myself in the blue collar bucket of your two main audience types. And up until I've gotten here, I've gotten a hint that I'm going to save the world. I think what you said, your first sentence there was pretty good. So the ultimate point of value through flow states. So summary of value. One of my main suggestions is to, at the beginning of the thing, give me a sentence or two on why it's worth my time to watch some of or all of this 10-hour video. Even before your triggers, because hopefully you wouldn't be triggering me. I mean, yes, sometimes there are triggers in doing something, especially if you talk about, we're going to save the world, right? That's a trigger to some people because they're like, you're overselling it. So I mean, one of my biggest suggestions is to work on a concise, not so triggering value proposition for them to do the rest. And then you can go into the triggers, but I don't even have a reason to read this, the first slide up to this point. I think like 9 out of 10 people that you're going to be introducing to, they don't have enough incentive to spend the 2 minutes or 1 minute watching this part of the video.
What if I framed it this way? What if I said in the first 2 slides of the presentation, the reason to get involved is that the doomsday clock is at 90 seconds to midnight, so you can save the world if you have a loud enough voice. And the problem with most people who are trying to change the world is that they're all competing in a shouting match. So this is a tool that if you do have a good idea that can change the world, especially one based on reason and logic, which is what the presentation is going to win the Nobel Prizes for, then your project, your voice could be amplified potentially millions. And I just asked ChatGPT actually how far, if you did win 6 Nobel Prizes at the same time, how much of a reach would you immediately get? And it said about 1 billion people. So right there, even if you're somebody who already has your own project or idea like Reasonpedia, this could greatly leverage your marketing and your reach very, very quickly. And then of course, if you're interested in that aspect on top of the flow states, because the systems to try and put you into a flow state in a self-determining way while you're trying to change the world, so that not only are you changing the world, but you're enjoying it. It's intrinsically enjoyable. And then you can also make a living off of it, which comes later with the Spirit license. But the point of the presentation is to basically satisfy all 11 life areas to get to that comprehensive sense of well-being.
So I think both of those value propositions are good, and I think they're short enough. I would still work on some wordsmithing of that to just bring it a little tighter. And one thing about that I've found in devising those is also sometimes you can oversell it, which it could be true, but as far as triggers, like you don't have it, you have to kind of like bypass those or something. So sometimes, and I hate to pull this, give examples of profit motive systems, but you know, Amazon started with books, but that wasn't their plan. But if they had gone in and said, "Oh, we're going to sell everything on the internet," you know, and be the worldwide seller, they wouldn't have gotten the VC funds because it sounds too big. So they said, "We're going to do books," and then we have some plans later on right there. So finding your audience and finding the one suggestion is kind of like, you know, you don't want to yet trigger them that later on when you kind of say, "Oh, these triggers, this may sound impossible. How are we going to do this?" And the final impact. But the first value statement, you can kind of not sell the whole thing or describe the whole thing. So like the ultimate point of value or the flow states. So, you know, just some, you know, a couple sentences saying, and I don't know if I would just preface it, just come out and say, this is what you're going to get out of this presentation. But the other thing is just to say, you know, the Nobel Surprize, find ways to reach, you know, more people with your product or the right people with your product, which sounds very salesy with your project. But I think the way you said it was better. I just wasn't typing as fast as you spoke.
Well,
so
it's recorded.
yeah. So being able to like say that I would actually choose which of those be first. And I'd almost say that top one, I guess. I don't know. I'd have to think of whether it works for both the blue collar and the Ivy Leagues. But I think since your blue collar people are people that are looking for justice and truth, then reaching the more, well, I don't know if your target audience is going to include people that don't have a project yet. So I think you could still, if they're short enough, hit 3. You know, if you have a project, this will get it out, help you get it out. If you don't have a project, this in itself is a project because it's going to improve the world. And then, you know, and then the other value could be the flow states, or you could leave that off if it's getting too long. But the goal is to kind of keep it short. And then once you've got them hooked, then you can talk about the triggers and say, hey, we're going to go through this. It's going to sound crazy. And here are all the things that you might hit. If you hit one of those, give it a little while. So yeah, I think through all my kind of, you know, I started skimming after the first 10 minutes or so. I did not get the point of flow states, and I could have just missed that. And I didn't get the point that this would help me, if I have a project, this would help me get my project out there. And I don't know how much of that is because I wasn't paying attention well, and how it, but still, I think that's a sign. Even if you are saying it, it's a sign that you may want to find, work on making it clearer.
Okay, got it. Yeah, because okay, no, go ahead.
So I didn't get much because I didn't really have that incentive. I did understand 30 minutes or an hour to YouTube page and looked at a couple of the videos, but a lot of those were very more on your Ivy League side because you were working with other people and they had the academic, maybe the wrong term, I'm not sure, but that they were aware of the different philosophies and philosophers and their distinctions. Yeah, so that, I guess that's kind of the end of my feedback. So we could either dive into how, although there's a couple of words, I guess, that are triggering for me, but that's really just me. I think most people would like them.
Yeah, tell me, what are they actually? Because that's important.
So the one that sounds funny is justice. Now, and one of the thing is like, and one pet peeve that I'm on right now, because I'm working as a part of the canonical debate lab, we've been going through definitions and how people use words. And a lot of people say, you said earlier that we don't know what logic means.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true to many of the potential concepts of what the word logic applies to. But there are some concepts of the word logic that we do know what they are. Like, so if you're talking about the logic that a computer uses, that is very well defined. And so if I was talking about logic, and in my mind I was thinking, Booleans, stuff like that, then I would, that wouldn't make sense to me. So when I hear the word justice, justice has several definitions, but I think most of them have a concept of the being punished for breaking a rule. And so justice is more about, obeying the rules and the consequences, as opposed to doing what's best for the person and society if something goes wrong. So some people would say, this person needs to go to jail because that's justice. And well, if jail doesn't actually help them, not like if it increases the chance of them increasing the crime again, then I don't want justice, right? I haven't quite found a better replacement word, but that word is one of the things. And then like flow states, like my understanding of the term flow states, I do think of them as valuable. I have been in them while computer programming, if we're talking about the same term. So they are valuable. It is something on my list of areas to potentially improve myself. I have to weigh that against the other things I have to do. So it hasn't raised to the level of the other opportunities for improving either my life or my impact on the world. Anyways.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. And then I didn't, when I was looking through, I honestly don't remember much of your presentation after that. I guess you do go into like a lot of the Nobel Prize and then start talking about game and stuff. So I did not none of that because I didn't know where in my brain to put it, because I didn't have this incentive of the reaching more people with a project, or because I didn't know where you're going with it. There was no place to link it up in my brain. And so having to go down a long, 30-minute or hour or 10-hour thing before I can link it back is beyond my brain's capabilities.
Yeah, and what came across my mind just now is like you're a little bit ahead of the curve. The fact that you responded with such a big presentation is kudos to you and the other people that are doing that. You guys are sort of the outliers where you're sort of like the first adopters that just you're open to everything. Well, not maybe everything, but you have a really good eye for knowing opportunities come out of left field and moonshots come out of left field. So it opens up the door for me to answer your questions and sort of like build one of those paths for you without you having to watch the video. But as I'm getting your feedback, it's already becoming crystal clear that yes, this approach in the beginning that I was kind of already intuitively thinking we need to do, or needs to be done for this New World Spirit, is definitely the problem. So instead of making a whole bunch of presentations, I want to kind of have this feeling of unity, like a oneness, where we're all watching one video and we're sort of not doing the siloed thing, because the siloed kind of logic is really what the problem of humanity is. The fact that we can't cooperate enough to solve, the Ukraine-Russian war, climate change, the AI crisis, the meaning crisis, all these crises, because we're all not realizing the infinite interconnectedness of the logic of all things. So to create a bunch of videos is actually repeating that kind of logic. So there's got to be an infinite diversity in a oneness. And so to break up the video has that risk. So instead of breaking up the video, because everybody on Earth, if this really is 6 Nobel Prizes worth of, knowledge, it would be really unique to have everybody on Earth watching one video, and saying, I watched the video, I watched the Nobel Surprise. It's a unifying thing that's needed in movement building. But the diversity component is still a problem, because no one's going to watch 10 hours unless they have the time or the energy or whatever, like you're saying. And the trigger words, there's so many because it's literally covering everything. So at some point, it's guaranteed going to trigger somebody because all the opposites are in the presentation. That's what living logic is like. So really, justice, flow states, yes, as a more sort of, I would say, rational engineering kind of personality, an INTJ, right? Yeah, flowy states and all that kind of gooey stuff is not necessarily your forte. So I knew that might be triggering for you, but it's like you're already trying to sublate that, you're trying to transcend that already, which is a testament to your growth mind state. But I think really what is the solution here, if we want to keep that unity, is that if I was to reach out to you a second time, what I would do based on your feedback is I wouldn't just do the generic, like I did make it a little bit specific, so that's maybe what caught your interest a little bit. I would actually go through and go, here, Bentley, this is your, I don't know, we can give it a name, like this is your view stream, or this is your like path stream, or this is how you watch this 10-hour video. You don't watch it forward to back because you won't make it past 10 minutes, for example. But here's 10 minutes. You only have to watch 10 minutes of this video, but you have to jump from here, watch 30 seconds, jump to here, here's 5 minutes, jump to here. And then at the end of the jumping, you have 10 minutes that fits what you want to see in the presentation, and that might motivate you to watch the whole thing. I think something like that would probably solve the issues of the 10-hour problem that you mentioned. The fact that I kind of characterized your work as too philosophical, but I do love that you're part of this canonical debate lab about definitions, because if we actually talk about the Nobel Prizes in the next 20 minutes, that definitional problem is literally the root of all of our problems, especially if we understand logic in its universal sense and not in just its particular examples like computer logic and then, football logic and everybody's logic, right? There is a universal logic that I think is needed. And so I feel like you would understand it. You would understand the importance of it. Whereas some people who are more like intuitive, flowy, they kind of have it ingrained in their intuition. It's like they're doing logic without thinking about it. It's heuristic, right? They don't have to break it down into abstract concepts. I feel like you're very uniquely positioned to maybe understand how this could win 6 Nobel Prizes and then know other people that would actually pick it up. So without creating a second approach, I guess for the next 20 minutes, I could probably just tell you what's in the video that might interest you and answer your questions on any further questions, and then see if it's something that you think could still in your mind change the world and build off of the truth that you see that needs to happen in the world to change it, such as Reasonopedia or just reason in general, defining logic properly, for example. There is an example that Hegel gives that I think you'd find satisfying, but based on my feedback to your feedback, what do you feel? What do you think we should do in the next 20 minutes?
Yeah, I think if you feel like that there are if there are sections in the video that you think, I mean, I don't want you spending a lot of time like customizing the flow for me. But so at times I'm talking about things that work with me and things that work with others. But if you had someone who's not as familiar with the philosophers, but someone who did care about improving the world, I still think you need to be able to handle both sides of that. Oh, they already have an idea to improve the world, or they may not, and they may be looking for something. Although I guess if you're talking to me, then yeah, if we just assume that I'm a person that's not familiar with philosophy in depth, but wants to improve the world, yeah, what parts of this video would I want to see? I don't think you need to narrow it down to, I'm an engineer type, and so you want to do that. Hopefully it doesn't have to go that far. Hopefully it'll just be 2 or 3 paths. But yeah, so if you like, it'd be nice to also see, like in the video, when would have I seen this incentive of either reaching more people by project or that definitions are the core problem. Where would I see the value proposition that you think will speak to the blue collar as a project people?
Great question. You know what? I think
or just
that
wherever
really,
you want to go in the video.
This feels like there's a lot of space in this conversation all of a sudden. Thank goodness. The whole thing is about logic in the end. That's why I think you're kind of perfect for this. But I'll say for the blue collar, the reason why the blue collar, I think, end up caring a lot about justice, or at least caring about like getting a better world, is because we're overworked. Like that's the real problem. We're just constantly overworked. And in terms of flow state language, there's actually 6, I could try and pull it up here. I don't know if I can share my screen. Do I have permission to?
Be able to give it a try. If it doesn't let you, I can give you permission.
Yeah, because I can just open up the Wikipedia here, and I actually, in the presentation, I actually give this example, I think somewhere at hour 5 or 6 or something like that.
I think that needs to be a little earlier than 5 hours.
Yeah, but once I think people start seeing the vision, they're going to be
maybe not the logic stuff, but the incentive.
That's right. So if I show you this now, you don't have to go through it. Okay, here we go. So let's pick this one. It's just on Wikipedia.
You're muted all of a sudden. I don't know if I did that or. Yeah, you're still muted. Nope. In Zip.
Whoa.
In Zip.
That's weird. Okay, well, I don't know why that happened.
Are you sharing screen? Is it changing microphones or no? Anyways.
Yeah, it shouldn't. That's never happened before, but the diagram that I showed on there showed all the emotional states, and then flow state was like that little sliver up in the corner. But what happens in the blue collar world is we are not allowed to be in flow. You're either in arousal or anxiety, which means you're burning out and being overworked, especially if you're a talented person. Corporations with for-profit, it's just like work, American dream. And then you work your life away because we can work 24/7. We're always connected. Or you're in a very low skilled job where it's all about mechanism and you're basically a robot and your life essence dies away. And then you have apathy and you have boredom. So we're sort of in those two extremes in the labor force, in the blue collar world. And even in the white collar world now it's happening. But we really need to bring that into flow. So I would say the labor process is in a very painful position, and that people who want to change the world from that demographic, really, they just want decent working hours, spend time with their kids, be a human being, not just have a week of vacation pay at the end of the year, but actually go traveling and not worry about their mortgage. And inflation is going up, so people's their wages are actually being cut, even though they're getting a wage. If it's not 7%, they're actually getting a cut. So if you really look at it, the real wage hasn't gone up in 40 years. And I think that's why the blue collar class is like, something is wrong here. It's because we've gotten systematically poorer for literally 4 straight decades, to the point that we can't afford anything. We're literally going into debt to just stay afloat.
Yeah.
And I think that's what will appeal to the blue collar class. We're going to solve that problem.
I'm thinking maybe for your paths, maybe you could keep the blue collar, white collar differentiation, but also maybe people that are familiar with philosophy and not familiar. And then in that the quadrant I'd be in would be, I mean, I would probably be more white collar if that's your focus, because because I was in technology and that's been a high paying job. I've done okay.
You're like a half and half. You're like in the middle.
Yeah.
You're like perfect to bridge the worlds. You're what we call a sublation.
Yeah, and yeah.
That's okay, because ideally,
what I'd be interested also hearing, so the flow state thing, well, one quick, it's probably not worth your time to get into, but my son, he's 30 something, and he's choosing jobs that allow him to get into a flow state because they're not interesting. So he was working at a coffee factory, and then right now at a place that sets up computers for corporations. So it's a lot of repetitive work that you can just zone out, which is a form of flow state. It may not be fully realized or valuable flow state, but that's just, I guess that's just the aside. What I'd like to see in here, so I guess two things, although feel free to go in a different direction if you want, is I'd like to see if you already have a slide that talks about the incentives for going forward, either with the flow state, but if you have a section in here that talks about how this would help me get Reasonpedia seen by more people, because when you ran across me, you're obviously aware of my project, so that may have been the incentive that you would have given me. And then we could
yeah. I guess one last comment on the paths, because I like that you said that. Ideally, we would have paths for every what are called dialectics. Dialectics are little logical chunks. So really, every logical chunk should have a path, and that quadrant you're saying is probably a pretty big swath. But the Nobel Prizes kind of already chop up the path. So it's like, if you like art, if you then do literature, if you like peace and politics, you do the Nobel Peace Prize. If you like physics, you do all the major domains are already kind of covered. But the only one that's not really fully understood is, what is philosophy? And should we have like a Nobel Philosophy Prize? But actually, the real logical way of thinking about philosophy is it's universal. All domains are actually philosophy. We're just thinking about them wrong. So in terms of reason and Reasonpedia, where does that fit in the presentation? Well, ideally, if every dialectic is being covered in the presentation at some point, technically every personality type would also have its own path. So INTJs would have their way of going through it. INFJs, ISTPs, we'd have like 16 paths just for personality types, and then we can mix that in with their strength finder, all that stuff. There's millions of paths potentially, but the biggest ones are the Nobel Prize ones. And yours kind of would fit, I would say, in terms of the peace process, because you're trying to create universal agreement. Or what did you call it? What was the precise word? World agreement?
Actually, I don't remember, because I keep changing mine. I'm constantly playing with language.
Good. It's a good sign.
Yeah, so I mean, like right now, I say explore the reasons behind popular and useful arguments to help us find holes in them. So, but yeah, it definitely, the goal is increasing the percentage of agreement, mass agreement.
Yes. So that is the fundamental problem.
That would fall under peace, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I feel like your Reasonpedia would fit under the Nobel Peace Prize. So if you go to that slide, if you actually look in the description of the video, I put the timestamps to where each prize begins. So if it's the Peace Prize, what did I say it begins at? I think it begins at like 3 hours or something, 3 hours, 18 minutes. I should have this open.
23. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's where you might want to start watching. But by that point in the video, quite a bit of development has happened because all the prizes are sort of linked. I try and keep them segregated, but there's a continuous logic happening in them. And so that continuous logic is the thing that it would be amazing. Oh, perfect. Okay, you can share. This continuous logic is what Reasonpedia, I think, if it embodied, would skyrocket this New World Spirit and Reasonpedia across the world. Because really, the problem of cooperation is agreement. But really, agreement is based on, of course, logic and reasoning. And there's two types of logic and reasoning. So if we actually go to the Nobel Literature Prize, I don't know if you can pull that very quickly, but I actually map out how logic is connected directly to culture and the universal agreement process.
Just pull the slides directly, actually. I don't know if you agree with that.
Oh yeah, actually. Yeah, I put the link in there. What slide is it? It's like slide 14 or something. Oh, it's right one above the cactus, up right there. Yes, okay. So when I saw your universal agreement process, it reminded me of this kind of cascade here underneath the hero's journey. It says cooperation is interdependence, interdependence is culture, culture is communication, communication is language, language is grammar, grammar is logic, logic is abstract or concrete, concrete logic is universal meaning is the absolute. So when you say universal agreement, it's sort of like this universal meaning process where no matter who looks at it, they get the same meaning. And that has to do with clarity of communication. And then eventually that leads to cooperation on addressing the doomsday clock and all these terrible things that are happening to our species. So I feel like there's a direct alignment. And the Nobel Literature Prize is where I'm sort of explaining how we're going to use language to sort of do that. But to get into the real logical process, you need to understand what sublation is to get to this universal agreement process. And sublation is what is missing in terms of the kind of logic we have in the world today. And only Hegel's logic kind of contains this peaceful movement of what logic was supposed to be. But we chopped up logic, which is why logic itself can be brutal and nobody can agree on what logic is. So even talking about logic can be a source of disagreement using logic. So Hegel solves that problem. And it requires understanding what sublation is, which is a universal logical movement of the universal logical dialectics. So if you wanted to really get into the meat a little bit, this is maybe the Nobel Literature Prize might be a good place. But if you go back to the peace slide, the one past this one, the cactus is really to kind of remind, like you're never going to forget the cactus now. It's a dancing cactus, but that's the point, is that the paragraph that it's behind is from Hegel directly, and he's describing how when we're going about the reasoning process, which Reasonpedia is trying to map out, we're doing it wrong. And he says refutation is not properly understood in its dialectical necessity, its true logical definition. And he says what we call reasoning, or what we call refutation in the reasoning process, is actually abstract, and it is causing all the problems in the world, because a real refutation is not a setting aside. It's not what's called an abstract negation, where you're throwing the baby out the bathwater. A real refutation is actually an integration. It is a seeing the truth or the universal principle in somebody's position, and then seeing its limit simultaneously, and then transcending that limit into a higher universal, which incorporates this universal in a more context-specific way. And so this constant evolution process is what that cactus is. It's like a plant. So a plant doesn't just like negate its seeds and then all of a sudden we spontaneously have a stem, you know. It's a growing process where only the immediacy of the seeds is canceled, but the genetic information and the entelechy, Aristotle calls it, it continues into the next form of immediacy. And then it just keeps developing from the stem to the bud, to the blossom, and then creates seeds again in a circle. So basically what this slide is showing is that things like Reasonpedia, if it really wants to get to universal agreement, needs to master sublation and have it built into every step of the diagramming process, so that it's more like a plant-like logic, a growing kind of process, and not just this abstract warring. And we use ordinary language to say, well, we already have that. It's common ground and finding common principles and all this. But that is the ordinary abstract way of finding commonality and common ground. when we understand the dialectical version and the speculatively dialectical version, which are all missing logical movements in terms of universal processes of logic. Everything else, common grounds, common principles, all that stuff, that's particularized logic. But these movements are the universal versions, which apply and is the ground of all those particulars, including computational logic. So I feel like if you want to skyrocket Reasonpedia, if you helped win the Nobel Peace Prize and you demonstrated as a proof of concept that it actually works in a software system that we can use in the spirit games, in the language games that we play later, then that software system, that linguistic logical process in the universal sense is how we get to universal agreement in a very fast way that doesn't fall into the pitfalls of all these other softwares that already are supposed to govern reason, like Kialo or whatever it's called, or you know. So this is the new thing that nobody else is doing that I think is novel enough to win the Nobel Peace Prize. So we have to show proper refutation and proper meritocracy. So there's this concept of universal quotient. So we have all IQ, we have IQ, right? But there's something else in this reasoning process called UQ, universal quotient, and not just intelligence or general intelligence quotient. So this UQ is what Reasonpedia might want to measure in terms of how good are you at doing this living kind of universal reasoning. And then the higher up you are in that kind of reasoning, the metacognition of it is what is the new meritocracy, the true meritocracy that's not just this abstract expertise that leads to virtuous and vicious economic cycles that split society anyway. So this is how we really get to a more peaceful reasoning process that's never been done before, except for Hegel, but nobody's understood Hegel until now. And that's why I'm teaching people who have philosophical backgrounds to say, well, this is how a Stoic would do it. This is how, and then it really accelerates the process. So I don't know if, does that make sense to you? Did I do a good job sort of pitching that in a specific way to your niche?
I think, surprisingly enough, I think you got me to see a value in digging deeper, which is, you know, it's like writing a news article as opposed to a book. In a book, you can do this like nice build up, but a news article, each sentence, and then the persuasive thing, each sentence has to convince me to read the next sentence, right? If it doesn't do that, at least partially, it's failed.
Awesome.
So this gives me something in my own research to go, and it does, like in Canonical Debate Lab, we have several kind of claims that we're making, and part of it is progressive formalization, which I think is very similar but not the same as one of the details in the proper refutation process, you know, where it's not just formalization, but it's also clarification. So the people work together to rephrase things. So we probably have several principles in there already kind of in our discussions. And the Canonical Debate Lab, just so you know, is a group of, I don't know, probably 20 people now that are trying to make technologies, just because they're all technologists. Well, not everyone. One's a rhetoric professor. Wow. That help people. The canonical debate was saying, well, we want some place where all the claims are written out very clearly. And that's where that was the butt of the discussion. But now it's like a whole bunch of people running kind of systems that make debate more effective. So we have the Wysaurus guys. I don't know if you've seen that. We don't have anyone from Kiala.
Okay.
But Wysaurus and canonicaldebatelab.com, if you end up going to that, you can see a list of the different apps that people working on in different facets or different theories of improving debates. You know, kind of a tricky word. We use it because people are familiar with it, but it's just kind of coming to a clearer understanding of shared reality.
Yes, I love that. Okay, so then what you're triggering here in the last minute or two is, yeah, if they saw this, I think they'd be like pretty intrigued too, because I've never seen this before. But there's one point in the video, I'm trying to open it here, but it's not working. But at the end of the video, like I think in 9 hours and 20 minutes, there's another, oh, okay. I'm trying to open here to find the timestamp for you. I don't know if you can go to it in terms of the
there's 920.
Yeah, it's a little bit past this. You're going to see Boole, and you're going to see Frege, and you're going to see all the logicians.
Slide, or is it an Excel spreadsheet like this?
It's an Excel, but it'll be blue, so you'll be able to see it pretty quickly. It's somewhere in the end here. But I basically, each column is a philosopher or a logician, and this universal logic is really underneath all logics. So what we did is we showed that all these forms, all these, yeah, right there. Okay, I think it's somewhere in here. If you go a little bit more, I think it should show Boole and Hegel and Peirce. Yeah, here we go. So you can see here in right here in the center of the screen, there's a big D there for domain, because Boole is about that. You can see all the logical symbols are listed there in a sort of a descending order. That's the growing proper refutation, maybe this progressive, like you said, progressive formalization of Boole. And then if you look over, there's the concept script, the Begriff script of Frege. And then basically what we're showing is real logic has to be self-justifying and self-grounding. And the Aristotelian logic that we have, or the second order, whatever kinds we have today, are not themselves justified by logic, because we use logic in an instrumental way, which means it's kind of outside of itself. So how do you justify something by its own self? It has to be self-grounding, which means it's a circular thought. But circular logic is the opposite of logic, right? So you can't use that. But Hegel says, no, actually real logic, when it's grasped in its true essence, is self-grounding, where the antecedent and the consequent switch positions so that the antecedent becomes the consequent, which becomes the antecedent to its own antecedent, which sounds ridiculous. It's like Russell's paradox in terms of the set that contains itself, the universal set. That kind of self-reflexive thought is actually the way that true reason works. But you have to go to the extremes of thought to find that self-justification. And so the first universal agreement that I think needs to happen here, and maybe the canonical debate lab would probably be the perfect vehicle for it, is that the first dialectic that I think everybody can agree on very easily, the most abstract and simplest category of pure logic, is something called pure being to Hegel. And it is the true formal foundation of all logic, self-justifying logic, that itself has no presuppositions, is a presuppositionless beginning. And so that means it's the only self-justifying logic that we can begin with. It's the only one, I think, because it begins with sheer immediate indeterminacy. So this is all Hegel speak, which is totally new. Nobody understands this. But the breakthrough reading that makes all these Nobel Prizes possible is that this kind of logic is the true universal kind that the canonical lab is probably going to end up repeating in some particular form. But because it's not truly universal, there's going to be some kind of disagreement somewhere in the formalization of it, not in the truth of it. So we're trying to give the truth of it at the beginning so that we can just get it proper from the beginning, from the foundation, and then unite them, sort of like we did here with Boole, Frege, Peirce, and Hegel. Is I'm showing that the meta-analysis is that the symbols we use to apply to objects, and we began this talk with you saying that, you know, it's the logic that's not just about applying to things. This logic applies to itself. Those are the logical symbols growing into each other without an object there to apply to. They're applying to themselves. And that's the brilliance of Hegel, is that he justified the symbols themselves through the symbols themselves. So that's the brilliance of that progression you're seeing there. We just started, we only put the first 10 symbols there, and they could be wrong, but it's the beginning of maybe the debate lab to sort of like be like, wow, these are actually congruent. These symbols are actually meaning these same universal logical dialectical movements. And we just need to do that for about 200 categories. So that's the power of the logic. And I'm really inspired by I'm inspired to look into these guys a bit more. But if you know anybody else that would understand what I'm saying and the importance of it in terms of creating world peace as the true foundation, without logic, we can't have agreement. But we have to have this right universal living kind of logic that I think only Hegel has ever done, at least in scientific form, that whether you're secularist or you're religious or you're artistic or you're blue collar, white collar, whatever, this applies universally to everyone. Okay, I'm about 5 minutes over.
Yeah, that's okay for me if you have a second. The thing that the next kind of question I think would also be good to kind of answer up front is, what's going to be the ask on this? And there may be several, so maybe that doesn't apply, but you mentioned something about training and teaching this. So, what are you expecting us to eventually do, the viewers of this to do with it? Is it share it in their own language, or is there something else like helping you go through these things and line them all up? Do I need to know all of this to help out?
Well, you can work in a siloed way, but the true power of it is to grasp the universal. That's the only thing that's really missing in human society right now, is just the universal logic. And because Hegel was the only one that did it in scientific form, we kind of have to use him. But the brilliance is that the reason why he got to universal logic is because he summarized 133 philosophers and scientists in history. So really, we're basically doing the sum total of all science and philosophy of the last 2,500 years. So I think, yes, basically the ask here is we need to fill out all these columns as much as possible. Each one is basically a PhD. So it's CV. I think people can have their CVs accredited with this. The Nobel Prizes, because we're going to apply for these prizes as a team, we can nominate for the team and everybody can get a Nobel Peace Prize on their CVs. And that will help amplify your voice, right? In terms of getting paid, like you'll be giving up intellectual property potentially, just like I am. But the way that I'm trying to structure the spirit license that came at the beginning of the video, I'm saying if you do give real talent, real value to this, because you can see it has the potential to change the world, we want to restructure the economy at the same time that we're restructuring the logic, because the true genius of the logic is that it's really the same logic in every Nobel Prize in different shapes and forms, or different symbols in different contexts. So physics is really the same peace process of the universal logic. It's just in physics form in space and time. Same with chemistry. It's just the same logic in a higher concrete form. Then economics, blah, blah, blah. So if you really grasp the universal logic, you're going to be able to understand all the Nobel Prizes. That's the true genius of true universality. It's the same thing at each stage. So the spirit license is saying if we win the Nobel Prizes, 6 of them, if we win all 6, that's $7 million roughly. And we're going to share that with everybody who participates, up to $90,000. So nobody, not me, not anybody is going to get rich off of this, because that's not the point. We're not motivated by material wealth. We're motivated by this inner lack that's happening in wealth. And so I think the going studies right now is that $90,000 Canadian purchasing parity is what creates optimal happiness per unit dollar. So even if we're resource scarce, this is the optimal that we can give people, where we get the most amount of happiness and growth mentalities to create flow states, rather than overextending. You still get happier after 90,000, but you get less happy per dollar.
Right. So let me, I think you could spend more time kind of explaining that, but let me see if I can restate it. So the major participation path is for people to join this project and group of people to actually try and win some set and hopefully all of the Nobel Prizes, right? So the ask would be for me to set us kind of not completely set aside, but I'd have to donate a lot of time to this that wouldn't be spent specifically on Reasonpedia.
Well, this is the sublation, is that as long as Reasonpedia wants to come, I don't even know if that's even necessary. If you, okay, there's 2 ways. If you bring Reasonpedia under the New World Spirit, then okay, that's one way to do it. But if you want to take this universal logic, intellectual property stuff and put it into Reasonpedia, then all that the spirit license says as a stipulation is that if you're an external organization and you want to use this, all you have to do at this point anyway is pay all your employees $90,000 a year to mimic the spirit license that we're going to pay people. And if you can't do it at first, you have to make some kind of commitment that if you do make a lot of money off of it, that's what you pay people. And it kind of goes up in equal increments based on flow state calculations, so that people aren't getting burnt out and they're getting paid the same. You get all this weird communist kind of like abstractness that didn't work. We have to measure how much work people are doing and then pay them in this new way. So I would say those are the 2 modes of trying to work together. But it's really just about incorporating the universal logic either into Reasonpedia in some kind of software that tracks this new way of doing it, in terms of the practical application. But in terms of the theory, this spreadsheet here is like it's a database basically, right? Somebody's going to have to create this somewhere. So if it's not on this version, they're going to recreate it somewhere else. But in the interest of time, because we're literally starting World War III potentially in the next 4 months, because as soon as the world economy collapses, which is now basically guaranteed, it's going to put a lot of pressure on people, and they're going to become desperate, and economies are going to start to fail potentially. And one of the best ways to keep an economy propped up is war. War is a tremendous economic engine. And so there's going to be even more incentive on top of the geopolitical tensions, on top of the ideological tensions between NATO and Russia and China, to really escalate the war. So I feel like we have about 3 to 4 months before the next level of escalation happens. And I feel like if we have a whole bunch of solid organizations, we may get stuck in some kind of gridlock bureaucracy. Unless we know sublation. If we understand that real process of refutation, then it doesn't matter whether you're external, you're in the group, it doesn't matter. It starts sublating pretty quickly because we're being universally reasonable people. We can reach agreements a lot more efficaciously, which I explained at the end of the video here with this last document. So the second half of the video, the first 5 hours is theory. The second 5 hours is practice. How we actually apply this in terms of a game that is simultaneously educating people on how to reason properly, how to build linguistic structures, how to do all this stuff as a game and doing it together as a team. And so the second half, especially that last document that you're looking at here, it's called the Universal Design document, to show how we use universal logic to design our experiences for this flow state in all the Nobel Prize areas in our lives across the 11 life areas. So that's how it kind of threads together. And that's how right now, in terms of partnerships or getting people's real talent on board in such a short time span, that's how I'm kind of saying it with the spirit license. You give whatever you want. And I'm saying that as long as you give 5, I think, 5 meanings to the story of being, which is the game. If you do that and you understand the universal logic to do it properly, then you get a part of the Nobel Prize money, up to 90,000, or however. If we get 10,000 people, it's the prize money divided by the number of people. So if it's like 10,000 people, it'd still be $600 per person. But at this point, I think we're not really motivated by money. It's just one of the ways to get people interested. But in terms of the intellectual property, it's already in this presentation, but if you want to apply it, I'm trying to make it so that we're all getting proper compensation for how hard we work. And the main compensation is that nobody gets burnt out anymore. We're not pushing people into arousal and anxiety or boredom and apathy. The whole system is really just to try and get us into flow no matter where we're working. So yeah, that's hopefully going to motivate you to watch.
Do you have a slide in here anywhere that talks about the different kind of ways to participate? Yeah.
Yeah, if you go to the stream of spirit, which is slide 15, I think. Right down with that one, up one. Yeah, there's 5 levels. So the first one is you can go to the smashing room, which is about absolute negation and how consciousness learns through logic. Or the second one is the 11 life areas, where if you want to help people like just make their life better and provide services or advice for, physical, mental, academic, spiritual, practical things, you can do that. If you want to do the what's called Pareto rotations, it's kind of like the economic redistribution engine of the resources during the games. You can work on these Pareto rotations. And it's pretty controversial, but it's basically what sensuous value is approximating in reality. So there has to be some way to redistribute that, and that's like one idea. It's called idea-based economics. The fourth one is the actual game itself. It's called the sentence game. It's a linguistic game of making a story together using these universal logical principles. And then the fifth one is called universal design, where if you want to build on the theory that is used to expand the universal logic, then you can start filling out those columns and sublating all these particularities into one sort of essence, which embraces infinite creativity. So those are the kind of 5 levels of like investment, where it goes like from super basic and it gets more and more invested as you go. But yeah, I think that you guys, if you understand logic, would probably understand Hegel's version if I explained it to you. And that's just free. That's just me, like, I'm in outreach mode right now. Anybody that wants to learn, I'm just giving it out there as long as you understand the spirit license. You can even change it with me. It's like, well, I don't like this, and we can kind of change things as we go along. But in 3 or 4 months, there's really not a lot of time. So I'm trying to find people that are already there and just like running, just taking our stuff and like, hey, we're all doing the same thing. We're all trying to get to universal agreement. What's the first agreement? Well, it's probably pure being. That's the foundation of all logic. And then Hegel was right about this, that, and the other thing. But here, like this person got this piece right, and then we start putting it all together in a universal design. That's kind of what I'm thinking is the fastest way. That's the fairest to everybody. But I think there's a lot of room here. If you guys are already doing something, you'll understand. If you watch the video, I think you'll understand why it is possible to win 6 Nobel Prizes just with logic.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of was able to pull out of you the reasons why I might want to watch the video. I still don't see myself taking 10 hours out of my life to watch the whole thing.
maybe just watch the piece 1, or the literature in the piece 1's 2 hours. And if you watch the universal design, that's 3 hours. But I would say to get, if you're more into the database programming side, the universal design almost to me feels like maybe even a better start. But because it sort of builds off of everything beforehand, it might be hard to comprehend, but it is a simple concept. We're just taking the universal logical categories and we're transposing them as form. And we're showing that every discipline is really just doing its own version of logic with its own special terms. And that across all the different forms is one universal logical movement, sort of like the periodic table. So I'm actually calling that last universal design document the universal, or the, what do I call it, up to us, the universal periodic table of absolute shapes. And Hegel calls like each logical movement a shape. So we're just showing that the same shapes are underlying every domain of human knowledge in a way where the content is the form and the form is the content. The logic isn't completely outside of itself. It is its own form and it is its own content. So that dialectic is what Hegel got right. And that's sort of the mind-blowing thing at the end. So if you think you can understand that, then that spreadsheet, that database at the end would probably make a lot more sense to you than the average person who might have to go through all the presentation to even understand that. But because logic is your guys' domain, maybe that's where you should start.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I'll have another little look around.
At least 1 more hour, I would say, between the Nobel Peace Prize, or maybe even the Nobel Literature Prize, because you're doing language games. There's an ontology there that maps out how the growth process happens. So if you want to see the actual ontological map of logic itself, there's like at the end of the Nobel Literature Prize, I actually give it there, all right there. And then the expansion of it is the universal design document. So if you only have like 1 more hour between those two, I would probably say that's where you might want to narrow in for the most value. And if you're interested in putting in more, you can ask me to talk to the group, and I'll explain them the Hegelian version, and then see what they think. And then yeah, we can go from there. And if there's value, then either I help Reasonpedia skyrocket, or Reasonpedia helps win the Nobel Peace Prize, and then it all goes up together. But time really is of the essence, so I appreciate you giving me this hour and 20 minutes. I'm basically in outreach mode now. I did all the theory, so at this point I'm looking to just have conversations for like the next basically 3 months. And so you message me, I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. And whatever works for your schedule in your 50% of your time that you're allowed to do changing the world stuff, I will be very respectful of that and make the most of it.
Well, thanks for your time, Mark.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon, hopefully.